My bad, y'all. My phone keep cutting off. But anyway, the meeting, it was some type of like President John Adams had sent pretty much an envoy to meet up with representatives of France to try to calm things down, because at that time, you know, well, actually, by this point, you could say, like, because let me see, by this point, John Quincy Adams had been appointed minister, plenipotentiary minister, but to I can't say that word right, Prussia, Prussia, which is basically just all the states collectively that represents Germany as a nation, pretty much. That's what that was. But he had got appointed to be minister there from the U.S., and his appointment lasted from 97 up until 1801. Now, as far as like the whole dynamic between the French and the United States, to kind of calm things down, because around this time, being that John Quincy Adams is a minister to Prussia, the United States is trying to negotiate another commercial contract, another 10 years or whatnot. But at the same time, as far as like the warring that's going on in Europe, Prussia was one of those nations that actually, wait a minute. No. It was Holland, I believe. I think it was Holland, the Netherlands, that they tried to negotiate another 10-year contract with. But as far as like what was going on with the French, they was pretty much warring with everybody of Central Europe, you know what I'm saying? Because they had made a declaration, right? Basically saying, to reclaim dominance. This is not the exact language, but this is what they were saying. Basically, to reclaim dominance over Europe that they had in the 1750s during the 7-Year War. Now, I don't know too much about the 7-Year War, but when they went at it with other countries, that's when Britain came out on top as far as like the prominent nation in Europe. So before that, the French was pretty much number one. So they wanted to regain that back. Now, going back to this period when John Adams sent like an envoy for peace talks, because he didn't want to mess up anything else on the side, as far as what they had going on, these commercial treaties they was trying to seek, and then the renegotiations of trade with nations that French had issues with. So when they sent this envoy and they met up with representatives of the French, they received a little lip. It was a lot of arrogance. Basically, the people on the side of the French was like, look, when you address us, you got to address us respectfully, just like, basically like how we were prior to the 1750s. But they used the term, like in the book, when I read this in the book, they used the term ancient, right? Like ancient, like the ancient kings of France. That was the writing in the book. And then not only that, they went further. They was like, in order for you to negotiate with us, keep in mind, they talking to officials of the United States, by the way, at this point. They like, in order for y'all to negotiate with us, y'all got to still pay a fee of $250. So when John Adams and them found out about this, they got pissed off, because it was, that was like when I read this in the book, right? I'm in the front room, I'm reading this, and then I just started laughing out loud, right? I'm not even paying attention to what was around me. I just thought it was funny. Everybody was like, what's wrong with you? And I explained why I was laughing. Basically, when I read that shit, I'm like, damn, that's some arrogant ass shit. That's some sticking your chest out. But again, the first thing it brought to my mind, and I had made a note to myself. I just dropped my cigarette on my fucking self. Excuse my language. Anyway, I had made a note. I'm like, man, I'm going to go ahead and find the name of this video. But I didn't find the name of the video, but because I'm speaking on it right now, I'm going to bring it up. It's a video. It's Tay-Rock. It's another dude named Chase, and it's Surf. And they are going live on Instagram, and they was just having their fans come up on there and rap. Somebody had typed something that Chess read, and Chess thought this guy, some fan, he thought the dude was talking to him crazy. So out of nowhere, while they sitting up there talking, looking at their phones, the old boy Chess he was like, what? Who the fuck is you? Or some shit like that. But the way he responded like, who the fuck is this nigga talking to? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, that's basically the feeling that John Adams and his cabinet had, and as well as those that he sent on his envoy. Like, who the fuck is y'all or whatnot? You know what I'm saying? So anyway, they continue warring or whatever, but eventually the French in the United States came to terms because it's September of 1800. That's the actual date. That's when they sat down and signed the peace treaty. Only because I feel like the French kind of like overextended themselves, and then their armies were starting to lose all of these battles from like Russian forces, from British forces, etc. You know what I'm saying? Like at one point in time, some of their forces had got trapped in Egypt or something like that. And some of their forces that were in Russia, you know, got bogged down or whatnot by professional British soldiers that in the book they referred to as cracks or whatnot. So by the time you get to September of 1800, you know, they felt like, okay, now it's time for us to kind of fall back a little bit. You know, we're going to end up messing up our economy. So they agreed to sign this peace treaty, and the United States took advantage of that while still maintaining their policy of neutrality. So it worked out for us in that aspect. As far as a year later, that's when you got the switching of presidential cabinets. The next president was Thomas Jefferson. So as far as like, you know, John Quincy Adams, he got recalled. By this point, it's April of 1801. So like the king of Prussia at the time, his name was Frederick Williams III. John Quincy Adams, you know, gave him his papers for recall, and then he left. But also during that same month, that's when they had their first child, George Washington Adams, or whatnot. So he left, came back to the United States sometime in June. I think like the next year, around April, also, that's where John Quincy Adams finally gets elected to become a United States Senator of Massachusetts. And the co-senator at the time was also Timothy Pickerings or whatnot. So when he became senator, he was saying like he couldn't really get too much done as far as like Timothy Pickerings, whenever like an issue will come up or idea that John Quincy Adams had, you know, Timothy would be missing in actions because he didn't want to put his constituency on the line, basically. You know, so like he didn't want to make a tough vote. Then following that, shortly after he got elected, the whole Louisiana Purchase situation came up. But just before I get on that, I want to say also, it was another guy named Walter Helen who had a mansion in Georgetown, which is right next to Washington City. And he offered John Quincy Adams and his family to stay there. Why? Because now that he's a newly elected senator, he didn't want to stay in Washington. According to the book and also additional articles on Wikipedia, Washington City was a rundown place at the time. They only had like 700, like a few hundred, what was it, 700 shacks or something like that? 700 shacks, but out of like 600 or 700, but out of all of them, only 1/3 of them were made out of brick. And they had the whole city. They had no sewage system. They had no churches. They had no museums. They had no hospitals. They had no organized paved sidewalks, and it rained a lot, and it was rat infested. And so he was saying like a lot of the elites, when they had the opportunity, they would just stay in places within proximity of Washington. And so as far as this guy, Walter Helen, you know, he had a mansion in Georgetown. He offered John Quincy Adams to move in which he took that offer, and he even gave him additional space for his work or whatnot. This guy, Walter Helen, at this point, he was taking care of the family of John Quincy's wife because he was talking to a lady by the name of Nancy. I believe that's who he married. That was Louisa Catherine Johnson's sister. And not only did he marry Nancy, he also took in the rest of their family members after her dad, Joshua Johnson, had died, by the way. So he moved in with him. I want to say about the next year, 1803, you got the Louisiana Purchase. That's causing like a big conflict, domestically speaking, and it split the nation pretty much. A lot of people was concerned about this land purchase. It was supposed to be like 1 million square miles of land or whatnot, and they were scared that it could change the whole paradigm pretty much, because as far as like all the various states of the United States, Virginia was like top notch compared to the rest of them. So like the other northeastern states, like such as Massachusetts, New York, and all that type of stuff, some people felt a certain type of way. Like if the United States went ahead and they granted this, or they purchased this land from the French, it could put everybody else in like, I don't want to say obscurity, but as far as the language of the book, they were saying like all these other states would just become like a backyard backwash or whatnot. So people was threatening to secede from the Union, and some of the proponents of that was Timothy Pickering himself. Also, ironically, the vice president of the United States at this point, which was Aaron Burr, and then a few other people. So like even though Thomas Jefferson, won the election and defeated his father, John Quincy Adams still was kind of like, maintain a relationship with him. So he's trying to let him know what was going on through the grapevine. Now, as far as the Louisiana Purchase, even though John Quincy Adams eventually voted against it, he was for it, but he admitted to himself, like, as far as like the Constitution, they had no validation. Like they had no legitimacy to make this purchase and then appoint governors and then charge people with taxes there. So that was a big issue. So John Quincy Adams felt like, maybe you could kind of like circumvent the language of the Constitution. So like his whole premise rested on the notion of manifest destiny, which he himself did believe in. And he felt like if you go with that philosophy, you kind of like, modify the language as far as this proposal, then people would accept it more. But you still, had this debate like, okay, it's not legal. But eventually they ended up voting for the land purchase. The million square miles is so fucking big, you could fit all of Central Europe into that space. So that ended up, creating more settlers, and then later on, these settlements eventually collectively turned into states such as Illinois, Kansas, all that type of stuff or whatnot. But just to make a long story short, to hurry up and go through this because my phone gonna cut off in 5 minutes. 1804. The vice president himself, like I say, he was campaigning on seceding, and he wanted to be the governor of, what was it? I think it was it New York? Was it New York or Tennessee? I believe New York. Yeah, New York State. But this guy, Alexander Hamilton, didn't like him, so he publicly like criticized him to the point where it calls him the election, as far as the gubernatorial election, and it pissed him off. So like, the newspaper called the American Citizen, the editor had put something out. Basically, he was dissing Aaron Burr, saying he was a piece of shit, he's a worthless human being, and he is so not a fucking nobody. He's so much of a nobody that even somebody like Alexander Hamilton could disrespect him with impunity. And it pissed off Aaron Burr. He ended up suing the American Citizen newspaper, and he challenged Alexander Hamilton to a duel, and he killed him. And so that happened in like June of 1784. Everybody found out about it. He was found guilty of murder. This man walked right into like November, like what was it? November 5th, right, of that same year, when they were in session, right? He walked right into the fucking building, into the chamber, and sat right in his seat as the president of the Senate. And it irritated John Quincy Adams. By the way, that guy never got, he never faced no type of time or anything like that. So then November 5th came, and then they went into session. And John Quincy Adams was irritated by that as well. He felt like, they were supposed to get some work done, but everybody went into session just so they could attend some horseback riding or something like that. Then when they reconvened, I want to say early the next year is when Aaron Burr finally retired. By March of 1805, Harvard University appointed John Quincy Adams as professor of, oratory and rhetoric or something like that. And I want to say like the next year, 1806, he spent the whole summer preparing for that position and whatnot. And then, let me see, the following year after that, is when the Leopard got attacked. Now I think that was August of 1807, and it got attacked by British ship, the USS Chesapeake, because they had started kind of like impressing American ships really a year before that, during 1806. But as far as like by the time you get to August, they actually pressed this ship and attacked it because they wanted them, like they wanted to search the ship for like 4 fugitives, but the Americans would not allow them. So they attacked the ship, started firing at them without warning them. 18 people got injured, and one person I think was killed. As far as like those 4 fugitives, when the British occupied the ship, they found all 4 of them. They hung one of the fugitives and took the rest in, but they never recompensated the United States for the damage they caused on the ship. So by the end of the year, December of 1807, that's when they put in they voted and established the Non-Importation Act, which means they're not going to import to any nation, period, but particularly the British. So like the very next year, people started going bankrupt because of that. Now, as far as like in 1808 itself, I want to say, what was that? January? The Secretary of State at the time, James Madison, he had got, elected as the, he got elected as oh my God, the nominee for the Republican presidency, right? And John Quincy Adams attended. It pissed off a lot of the Federalists at the time. So like a couple of months after that, around like May, I want to say, they got together in a meeting in Massachusetts, and they pretty much conspired to take him down and destroy his career. Following that, if not during the same meeting, shortly after that, they gave instructions to both senators, Timothy Pickering and John Quincy Adams, to vote to repeal the Louisiana Purchase. That caused John Quincy Adams to retire from his senatorialship because he felt like he didn't want to be navigated. It went against his integrity, and it disappointed him that he didn't have the trust of his constituents at the time. So 9 months before his senatorialship was up, he retired. He went back into regular life as far as his law business or whatnot. Then let me see. The next year is when he got promoted to, or appointed to be, the minister to, what was it? Russia. I believe Russia. He got appointed to be a minister. And again, if it's not Russia, possibly Britain, one of those nations. And that lasted up until 1814 or whatnot. And so he experienced everything that went on as far as like the second war between the Americans and the British. That's called the War of 1812. The book went into that. And then 2 years after that, the whole entire city of Washington, D.C. I was going to say Washington City. I'm still used to saying Washington City because that's what they referred to it as in the book, as it was originally called. The whole entire city got burnt down. The British and United States kind of like ended up in a stalemate, and they basically just agreed to, call it a quits or whatnot. Then after that, I want to say John Quincy Adams became the 6th president of the United States. And what was that? 1825 up until 1829, and then he died in 1848. So that's basically the book, as far as John Quincy Adams. Now, I'm going to go ahead and mention all of the presidents in order as far as like up into him. Actually, I'm going to go beyond. I'm going to go up to Andrew Jackson. So you got George Washington from 1789 up until 1797. Then you got John Quincy Adams from 1789 up until 1801. I mean, not 89. 1797 up until 1801. And then after him, you got Thomas Jefferson, 1801 up until 1804. Then after damn, I'm fucking it up. 1801 up until 1809. Then after Thomas Jefferson, you got James Madison. He served 2 terms, 1809 up until 1817. And then after James Madison, James Monroe from 1817 to 1825. Then John Quincy Adams from 1825 to 1829. Now, that's pretty much it, but I'm going to add something else. This is something that I left out, but I'm going to speak on. I'm going to go ahead and say this. As far as Washington, D.C., at the same time, in 1802, that's when they got their first mayor, I think he was. The mayor or the governor or something like that. Nah, the first governor. And his name was Robert Brent. And he was a racist. He got elected in 1802, and he lasted up until 1812. But in 1808, he had a law put in place to where, like, if you were black, regardless if you were free or African American, if you were caught after curfew, after 10 p.m., you would be fined $5. And today, that represents about, like, that's like $60 in value or something like that. And then if you were a slave, your slave master would have to pay the fine, the $5 fine. Only 4 years after that, he upped the ante. They upped the fine to about $20 because based on Wikipedia, because this is when I researched it in addition, they were saying, like, you know, people was afraid because they had a pretty good population of free blacks at the time. And based on the laws, they wasn't obligated to go elsewhere. So just to make things more stringent and keep a better watch over them, that's why they instituted those laws. But then another guy after him, some guy named Samuel Smallwood, you know, he became a little bit more harsher, but I ain't gonna go into him because it's not relevant. But the final thing that I do want to say is this whole thing about, you know, this relates to me ending this blog with going through the list of presidents. Before George Washington, right, there were 8 presidents of the Continental Congress. So that's basically being synonymous with the official president of the United States of America. I looked up this list because it's another concept that's kind of like talked about amongst certain circles. And there ain't nothing wrong with it, you know what I'm saying? But I never truly believed in it because it just never made sense to me. And that's the whole thing, the notion or the idea about, and I ain't going to say a concept, but the notion or the idea or the claim that the first president was a black person. So when I got done with this book, I'm like, let me check this out just to finally, you know what I'm saying, see if it's true or not. No, it's not true. The first 8 people who were the heads of the Continental Congress before George Washington, all of them were white, so it's not true. Now, the final thing I'm going to say is, you know, I was more so inspired because in 2017 when I was in Memphis, Tennessee, and I had been out there for a while, almost a whole fucking year, it was a guy that I had met. We had a conversation. We was talking about something else related to history, but then we got to American history because he asked me who was the first president. And I told him who it was. I said, George Washington. He said, no, it was a black guy. So went back and forth, da-da-da-da. And I asked him, I said, look, not to be racial, I'm a proud African American. Don't get me wrong. I don't wear that shit on my shoulder. That's just not my style. No diss to nobody else. I don't wear it as a costume on my shoulder, though. But I'm like, if that claim is true and there was a black person who was the president of the United States of America, even if he was just a fucking light-skinned person, I'm like, wouldn't that hurt the argument of racism? Because in order for a person to be a black president, the elites have to allow that. Because, you know, you think about the senators back in the day, they had to be voted. Oh, who's that? Oh, shoot, she's getting ready to leave. They had to be voted. I'm just going to keep talking.